But let's say a very good morning to Isabel. Isabel, nice to see you. Welcome back.
Good morning, and I'm very grateful to have actually got back without any drama. My journey wasn't complicated, but the way things are going, who knows whether you may have to wait, 15 hours in a bus in a car park somewhere.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I'm off to France, funnily enough, on Saturday, and I've got no idea how that's going to go. I'm taking the dog, taking the car, taking the kids, taking the train. So, it could be. Somebody said to me this morning, "Are you looking forward to it?" I went, "Not really."
No, I think you need to pack your camping gear and your thermos and a lot of food and God knows what else, a portable loo probably as well.
Yes, absolutely right. I mean, we've got so much to talk about this morning. Macron will get to, Biden will get to, but I can't miss out asking you, first of all, about Scott Benton, the latest MP in the Tory party, who seems to have fallen for a rather easily foreseeable trick, you would have thought. He's on the front page of the Times. He's the MP for Blackpool South, offering to help a betting company which doesn't exist to lobby ministers. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it, how stupid these people are?
Hello, MPs. Here is a broadcast for your benefit. Look, this is peak time as elections approach. This is peak time for journalists to pay tricks like this. So if you get approached by somebody offering to pay you quite a lot of money for doing things that seem easy but a little bit dodgy, chances are it's a scam and you're going to look very, very stupid. So don't be greedy. Be smart. Just say, no, thank you. I'm very, very, very busy looking after my constituents. I'm 100% focused on that, particularly at this time in the run-up to an election. Yeah, I mean, that's that's $1 million worth of good advice, that. I mean, but I bet they won't listen. There'll be another 5 or 6 before the summer, I'm sure. I can't even believe, I mean, these stings are as old as, they're probably older than I am.
Yeah.
The idea that seasoned politicians, smart people are falling for them. And, any good newspaper will set up a sophisticated operation. It's not going to be just a question of Googling to see whether the company they say they represent actually is this, and then finding a website and going, oh, well, that's all right then. I'll just say that I charge £1,500 an hour. These investigative operations are quite subtle sometimes. A lot of resources goes into them. You've got to do an awful lot more due diligence, or maybe just don't go there in the first place.
Well, exactly right. And I mean, people always say, well, perhaps we should stop MPs from having second jobs. I don't see how you can do that, because MPs will always be doing other things, whether it's writing an article for a newspaper or doing a television programme or a news, maybe a radio programme. They will have other interests. Some of them are doctors, some of them are lawyers. You really can't police that. So you can never say that they can't do a second job.
I actually don't have a problem with MPs having a second job. They've got to serve their constituents first and foremost, and if they don't, then they will be kicked out. The slight difficulty is that once you've elected your MP, you probably don't have a chance to kick them out for another 4 to 5 years. But I think that having that other interest, particularly, as you say, if they are a doctor or, perhaps they have some role with the armed forces or a whole range of things that MPs do or did in a previous life and want to keep going, that actually adds to the richness of expertise in the House of Commons. I don't think most people want our politicians just to be professional politicians, and we'd have to pay them a lot more if that was going to be the deal. It comes down to, are they or are they not taking the mickey? And constituents usually get a pretty good whiff of whether their MPs are taking the mickey or not, just by very dint of whether they're actually turning up for the ribbon cutting ceremony and all those things that MPs, some of them rather resent doing, but is part of what they should be doing.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, since we last spoke, there's been a whole flurry of activity. We've had Rishi Sunak announcing things right, left and centre. It seemed at one point that there was a new announcement coming out sort of every second or third hour. We've had the migrants being housed in disused prison camps. We've now got them housed on a barge. We've got them being sent back to Rwanda. We've got antisocial behaviour charters coming out all over the place. It's almost as though somebody's in a room in Downing Street just passing out pieces of paper going, do this, quick, immigration, law and order, tell them the parole board's not working, just keep going. But it does seem to be working in some way, doesn't it?
Well, you say it's almost as if someone in Downing Street is doing that. It is exactly what they're doing, keep the distraction going. I mean, Sunak has said himself that he should be judged on his delivery, not just the delivery of the message, but the actuality of the policy. And the barge policy with the migrants, I mean, it's an absolute classic of let's be seen to be doing something. Let's have some accommodation that looks pretty utilitarian. No one can call it luxury. Let us look as if we are doing something very, very proactive to solve this problem, because they kind of know that they're not going to be able to stop the boats anytime soon. I mean, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has literally admitted as much. She won't guarantee it. Now, politicians never want to guarantee anything because they know that they're probably setting themselves up for a fall. But this is a kind of, yet another. It's a kind of floating equivalent of the Rwanda idea. Let's make it look like we've got a grip of this. I mean, I strongly suspect that vessel, if we can call it that, it looks like a kind of cargo ship type thing. Will never be full of migrants. Can you imagine the utter mayhem? Tales of violence, of disease spreading, of all sorts of other bad things happening in that container will never actually materialise, because there probably only ever will be a symbolic 2 or 3 people on board this thing. And since there's going to be so many spare rooms, I'm hereby volunteering to take up residence, where I shall keep an eye on who's coming and going, how long they're staying there. And perhaps I'll do a little bit investigating myself as to how genuine their tales of fleeing from terror are. Because if they are fleeing from terror, I'm sure they'll be really glad to be in that nice vessel.
You would think, absolutely right. But it also does beg the question, doesn't it, that, why don't they put one of these out there for the homeless? Why don't they collect all the homeless people who are suffering and cold and miserable and wet on the streets of Britain and put them in one of those? Because it wouldn't cost any more money than they're going to spend on these migrants who shouldn't even be here.
Well, I can tell you that our TalkTV colleague, Nicola Thorpe, has got a barge that's going begging. She has her own barge and she's desperate to give it out to an asylum seeker. But apparently, guess what, Mike? There's a load of red tape involved. Government doesn't actually want her barge, even if it's a free barge.
Really? Interesting. Fascinating. Well, let's talk a little bit about the French, because Emmanuel Macron, currently over in China, what we used to say in America when I lived there and worked there was that whenever there was trouble at home, the president would always find somewhere to go abroad so that he could take everybody's mind off his domestic travails. And Macron could certainly do with that after what's been happening in Paris and the streets burning all over the place.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, France is in a complete mess. It's just chaos there. A lot of the problems relating to travel at the moment are linked to various strikes by air traffic controllers. I mean, we were flying to Geneva and there was all sorts of shenanigans about having to fly around French airspace because of these striking workers. And France, interestingly, has a very similar set of problems to the UK. So many Remainers like to criticise Brexit for some of our, for example, problems with labour market. But having just spent the last 9 days in France talking to some local businesses, they were saying, I was asking, will you still be here next year? Some of these businesses are very seasonal. And one in particular said, actually, I'm not sure we will be next year because I just can't get the workers. And when I asked why that was, it was to do with the welfare that's on offer, the social benefits effectively in France. So this is not a uniquely British or Brexit-related problem.
Well, indeed, as we saw with the Dover port problem as well, it was nothing to do with the fact that we left the European Union. It was everything to do with the fact that the French border force are particularly slow and don't provide enough people to deal with a very large number of vessels and a very large number of vehicles coming their way, as they would do on the first weekend of the school holidays.
Yeah, who would have thought it? I mean, not exactly unpredictable, is it? But also they don't mind screwing us over, do they? And that bit probably is slightly Brexit related. It tends to be the UK flights and the UK links that are most affected if there's a choice between affecting us and others. So it will be interesting to see what comes of that meeting with President Xi. I mean, I'm not really in favour of any of us on the side of the gods cozying up to President Xi. I mean, I just think that any interaction with him has to be very carefully handled, so that we make it absolutely clear during these interactions how much we deplore so much of what the Chinese regime is up to. And I'm afraid those opportunities aren't truly taken. So I would like to know what exactly is going to come out of this that favours the West and isn't just an opportunity for Xi to, grandstand, which he likes to do.
Well, as does Macron. I mean, Macron, I think, sees himself as some kind of peacemaker, doesn't he? Because he was having telephone conversation with Vladimir Putin as if he represented the entire force of Western Europe, and that he could somehow persuade him not to have a war with Ukraine. And there is talk now that the Ukrainians might be willing to converse about possible Crimean kind of deals that could be done. And I bet you Macron would just love to find himself in the middle of all of that.
Well, it was, you cast back a few years, and there was always a sort of signals that Macron was trying to position himself as the successor to Angela Merkel. And I think Angela Merkel, the then German Chancellor, did have some claim to kind of, in a sense, represent the EU, even though that wasn't formally her role. She was very, very widely respected. She was the kind of the mother of the EU, as it were. And Macron was positioning himself, I think, to take over that role. It hasn't worked out too well, not least because of his domestic travails, but he just doesn't have that level of gravitas, does he? And I think that the pandemic sort of undermined that ability for him to network across the globe and try to establish that kind of status for himself. Now I think it just looks a bit laughable, really.
Yeah, I think you're right.